The great chamber of the Galactic Hegemony Council stretched across 3 kilometers of cold black metal and ancient stone. And 12 species sat in judgment beneath lights that had burned for 10,000 years. This was the place where empires bent their knees and civilizations learned to obey. And today, it would decide the fate of a small blue world called Earth High Arbiter Vex Tholen of the Droweth. Dominion rose from his seat of carved obsidian, his 4 eyes scanning the assembled representatives with cold satisfaction. He was tall and thin, with gray skin stretched tight over angular bones, and he had overseen the conquest of 30 worlds during his long career. Fellow members of the hegemony, he announced in a voice that echoed through the vast space, we gather today to address the matter of the human species and their rejection of our generous terms. Murmurs rippled through the chamber as holographic displays flickered to life, showing images of Earth and its people. The humans appeared so fragile in these recordings, with their soft skin and their short lives and their endless conflicts with each. Other War Marshal Shethrix of the Kethvari swarm clicked her mandibles together in amusement. She was an insectoid creature the size of a small vehicle, with chitin plates that gleamed like polished armor and eyes that saw in spectrums humans could not imagine. These creatures barely discovered faster than light travel a century ago. She chittered. And they dared to refuse the hegemony? The ancient Orathi delegate, a being of crystalline structure who had witnessed the birth and death of stars, pulsed with soft blue light as it spoke through translation devices. Show us the transmission, the Orathi requested. Let us hear what the humans said. Vex Tholen gestured with one long finger, and the holographic display shifted to show a human female standing in what appeared to be a diplomatic chamber. She was dark-skinned with gray-streaked hair, and she wore a uniform decorated with symbols from many of Earth's nations. This is Director Amara Okonkwo, Vex Tholen explained. The human they chose to speak for their entire species. The recording began to play, and the council watched as a Droweth diplomat presented the hegemony's terms to the human director. The terms were simple enough. Would submit to hegemony governance, provide 40% of their planetary resources as tribute, and accept advisors who would guide their development. A long-approved Paths Director Okonkwo listened to every word with her hands folded calmly in front of her. And when the Droweth diplomat finished speaking, she did something that shocked every member of the council. Watching the recording, she laughed. It was not a nervous laugh or a laugh of desperation. It was the genuine laughter of someone who had heard the funniest joke of their life. And it went on for several seconds, while the Droweth diplomat stood in confused silence. I apologize, Director Okonkwo finally said, wiping her eyes. I truly thought you were joking. You want us to surrender our freedom, our resources, and our future because you showed up with some ships and made demands? The hegemony does not make requests, the Droweth diplomat replied stiffly. These are terms. You will accept them or face the consequences. Director Okonkwo's laughter faded, and her expression became something harder and colder than any human the council had ever observed. She leaned forward and spoke directly into the recording. Device with absolute clarity. Come. And take it? Then the transmission ended the council. Chamber erupted in noise as representatives from a dozen species expressed their outrage and disbelief. How dare these primitive creatures challenge the might of the hegemony? And who did they think they were dealing with? Vex Tholen raised his hands for silence, and gradually the chamber grew quiet again. The humans believe they can resist us, he said calmly. They are mistaken. I have reviewed their military capabilities, their technology, their resources, and I can tell you with certainty that they pose no meaningful threat to our forces. He brought up new displays showing Earth's defensive positions, small fleet of ships clustered near their moon, orbital stations that served mostly civilian purposes, and ground-based installations that were impressive by human standards, but laughable compared to hegemony technology. They have no planetary shields, Paxtolan continued. No weapons capable of threatening our capital ships. No experience fighting a war beyond their own atmosphere. Their species has spent most of its history fighting itself, and they have only recently achieved the unity necessary to even respond to us with one voice. War Marshal Shethrix rose to her full height, towering over most of the other delegates, and her voice carried the hunger of a predator who had spotted easy prey. "Give me the armada," she demanded. "Give me 12 million soldiers and 1,400 warships, and I will deliver Earth to the hegemony before their sun rises twice. I estimate 6 hours until complete subjugation, perhaps 8 if they resist foolishly." Several delegates expressed support for this plan, their voices overlapping. In their eagerness to punish the humans for their arrogance, Urathi delegate pulsed with uncertain light and spoke words of caution. "We know little of these humans beyond what we have observed. Perhaps we should study them further before committing to invasion." "Study them?" Shethrix mocked. "They are insects beneath our feet, and you wish to study them. The Kefvari swarm has devoured civilizations that spanned entire galaxies. And you think these soft creatures deserve our caution?" The Urathi fell silent, its light dimming with something that might have been shame or might have been something else in Tyrolevix. Halon called for a vote, and one by one the 12 species of the Hegemony Council made their decision. The vote was unanimous, as it always was when dealing with species foolish enough to resist integration. "Then it is decided," Vextolan declared. "War Marshal Shethrix will lead the combined Hegemony Armada to the Sol System. At 0200 hours Earth Standard Time, our forces will make transition and begin the conquest of humanity's homeworld." Shethrix clicked her mandibles in satisfaction as battle plans began forming in her warrior's mind. This would be an easy victory, a simple demonstration of hegemony power that would remind the galaxy why resistance was futile across the vast distances of space. Director Amara Okonkwo stood in a command center deep beneath a mountain on Earth. Screens surrounded her, showing the positions of alien observation probes that humanity had detected years ago. And she knew the Council's decision before. They had even finished voting. They took the bait, she said quietly to the officers assembled. Around here a general with stars on his shoulders studied the tactical displays. With grim determination, "How long do we have?" he asked, based on their fleet movements. "Approximately 47 hours until they arrive," Okonkwo replied. And then she smiled the same cold smile she had shown the Dralith diplomat. "That is more than enough time." The officers began issuing orders, activating systems that had waited in silence for decades, waking weapons that the galaxy did not know existed, and preparing humanity for the war that everyone said they could not win somewhere in the depths of space. The Hegemony Armada began its journey toward Earth, carrying soldiers who dreamed of easy conquest and commanders who had never known defeat. They would learn. The Hegemony Armada emerged from fold space in a flash of twisted light beyond the orbit of Neptune, and 1,400 warships arranged themselves in perfect formation like a swarm of metal predators preparing to feed. This was the largest invasion force the Hegemony had deployed in 300 years, and every commander aboard those ships believed it was far more than necessary to crush one primitive World War Marshal. Shethrix stood on the bridge of her flagship, a massive vessel called the Eternal Hunger that stretched 5 kilometers from bow to stern. And she watched the sensor displays with hungry anticipation. Her compound eyes could track dozens of data streams simultaneously, and right now every single one of them showed the same thing: nothing. "Where are their defenses?" asked Admiral Vorneth of the Dralith fleet. His gray face twisted in confusion as he studied his own tactical displays. their patrol ships, their weapon platforms, their early warning systems. Where is everything? Shethrix clicked her mandibles dismissively and gestured toward the distant blue dot that was their target. They have surrendered before we even arrived, she declared. The humans have realized the foolishness of their defiance, and now they cower in fear. This is what happens when inferior species challenge the hegemony. But Vorneth was not so certain, and his 4 eyes narrowed with suspicion as he examined the empty space around them. He had conquered 17 worlds during his career, and he had learned to be wary of silence. Perhaps, he said slowly, or perhaps this is a trap of some kind. We should proceed with caution. Caution is for cowards and weaklings. Shethrix snapped. The humans have nothing that can threaten us. Advance the fleet at attack speed, and let us finish this conquest before I grow bored. The armada began moving inward, crossing the vast distances of the outer solar system with engines that bent space itself. They passed the ice giants of Neptune and Uranus without incident, and they detected no resistance as they approached the asteroid belt at 0-2-40-7 hours Earth Standard Time. The fleet crossed into the inner solar system, and that was when the Whispers began. Communications officers across every ship in the armada suddenly reported strange signals bleeding into their encrypted channels. The signals were faint at first, like static on the edge of hearing, but they grew stronger and clearer with each passing minute. Then the voice spoke came through every speaker on every ship simultaneously, and it spoke in every language known to the hegemony with perfect pronunciation and calm clarity. You have entered sovereign space, the voice announced. This is your only warning. Withdraw immediately, or we will demonstrate why the silence of our skies is not weakness. Shethrix felt something she had not experienced in centuries, a tiny flutter of uncertainty in her warrior's heartbeat. She crushed it immediately and broadcast her response to the entire armada. The insects of Earth threaten us? She mocked. All ships accelerate to maximum attack speed. Show these primitives the meaning of galactic power, and let none survive to remember their foolish defiance. The fleet surged forward with renewed purpose, and sensors swept the space ahead for any sign of human resistance. There was still nothing visible. No ships, no weapons, no obstacles of any kind at 0301 hours. The armada's forward sensor arrays went dark. Every ship in the vanguard suddenly lost the ability to see beyond their own hulls. Screens that had showed clear tactical data moments ago now displayed nothing but static and error messages, and sensor officers scrambled desperately to restore their equipment. What is happening? Vornith demanded, his calm composure cracking as his flagship went blind alongside hundreds of other vessels. Unknown interference. His sensor chief reported with obvious fear in his voice. Our equipment is functioning correctly, but something is blocking all incoming data. It is as if the universe itself has stopped existing beyond our shields. Shethrix ordered her own ships to compensate, to route around the interference, to find any way to see what lay ahead of them, but nothing worked. And the darkness only spread. The hegemony commanders did not know what humanity had been doing for the past century. They did not know that human scientists had captured and studied every piece of alien technology they could find. They did not know that brilliant minds from every nation on Earth had worked together to find the weaknesses in hegemony systems, and they did not know about the thousands of stealth drones the humanity had seeded throughout the solar system, disguised as asteroids and space debris, waiting for this exact moment to activate their electronic warfare packages. The humans had studied their enemy, and they had learned that the hegemony relied on predictable technology. Every species in the hegemony used the same basic sensor systems, the same communication protocols, the same tactical networks. This made them efficient. It also made them vulnerable, deep beneath the mountains of Earth. Director Okongwo watched the tactical display as red icons representing hegemony ships began to flicker and fade. The enemy could no longer see, and that meant it was time for the next phase. Launch the kinetic packages, she ordered across the asteroid belt. Concealed platforms that had waited in silence for decades suddenly came to life. Magnetic accelerators, longer than cities, began charging, and tungsten rods the size of cars were loaded into firing chambers. The first rod fired at 0317 hours, and it crossed the distance to the hegemony fleet in less than a second. The projectile was traveling at 8% of the speed of light, too fast for any sensor to track, and too powerful for any shield to stop it. Struck a hegemony cruiser dead center and passed through the ship like a needle through paper. The vessel did not explode so much as it simply ceased to exist, torn apart by kinetic energy that overwhelmed every system simultaneously. The crew never knew what hit them. Second rod fired moments later, and then the third, and then dozens more began streaming toward the blinded fleet. Each impact was another ship destroyed, another 1,000 soldiers killed, another piece of the mighty armada reduced to expanding clouds of debris. Rix screamed orders that no one could follow as chaos consumed her fleet. Ships were dying all around her, vanishing from the formation without warning, and she still could not see what was killing them. Return fire, she commanded. Destroy whatever is attacking us. But her weapons officers could not target what they could not see, and their shots flew wild into empty space while the silent death continued to rain down from hidden positions at 0-3-20-9 hours. 47 hegemony ships had been destroyed. The armada it was supposed to conquer. Earth in 6 hours had lost more vessels in 30 minutes than the hegemony had lost in the past 50 years. And they still had not seen a single human ship. Verneth finally managed to restore partial sensors on his flagship by switching to backup systems the humans had not anticipated. And what he saw made his gray blood run cold. The kinetic platforms were visible now, emerging from concealment in the asteroid belt like predators rising from ambush. There were hundreds of them, all aimed at his fleet, all ready to continue the slaughter. War Marshal, he transmitted with a voice that shook with fear. We must withdraw. We cannot fight what we cannot see, and they are killing us with weapons we do not understand. Shethrix wanted to refuse, wanted to push forward and crush these impudent humans beneath her claws. But even her warrior's pride could not ignore the mounting casualties. Her fleet was bleeding, and she did not know how to stop it. All ships. She finally ordered tactical withdrawal to regroup beyond Mars. We will find another way to... Her words died as another volley of kinetic rounds slammed into her fleet, destroying 12 more ships in an instant. The humans had heard her order, and they had no intention of letting her escape easily. In the command center on Earth, Director Okongo allowed herself a small smile as she watched the enemy fleet begin its panicked retreat. The battle was far from over, but the first phase had exceeded all expectations. They thought we were prey, she murmured quietly. They are about to learn how wrong they were. The command center beneath Cheyenne Mountain hummed with controlled energy as hundreds of officers coordinated the defense of their entire world. Massive screens displayed the positions of every enemy ship, every hidden weapon platform, every drone in the vast network that humanity had built in secret over decades of patient preparation. Director Amara Okonkwo stood at the center of it all, watching the battle unfold with the calm focus of someone who had planned for this moment her entire adult life. Around her stood generals and admirals from every nation on Earth, united for the first time in human history against a common enemy. Status report, she requested. General Chun Wei of the Chinese Strategic Command studied his displays with grim satisfaction as he delivered the numbers. We have destroyed 83 enemy vessels and counting, he reported. Their sensor networks are completely compromised, and they are attempting to withdraw beyond Mars to regroup. Our kinetic platforms are continuing to engage targets of opportunity as they retreat. Admiral Sarah Mitchell of the United States Navy brought up new data on the main screen. Their fleet is fracturing. She observed. Different species are issuing conflicting orders, and their unified command structure is breaking down. This is exactly what we anticipated based on our intelligence analysis. Okonkwo nodded slowly, remembering the years of work that had led to this moment. When humanity first made contact with alien traders 20 years ago, the world's governments had understood immediately that they were not alone in a friendly universe. They were prey in a galaxy full of predators. The traders had been careful with their words, but they had let slip enough information for humanity to understand the threat. The galactic hegemony demanded submission from every species it encountered, and those who refused were crushed without mercy. Earth's leaders had made a secret decision on that day. They would smile at the aliens and pretend to be the primitive species the galaxy expected, and they would use every moment of that deception to prepare for the inevitable invasion. The hegemony thought humans were foolish and divided, fighting among themselves while greater powers watched from above. In reality, every major nation had been working together in absolute secrecy to build the greatest defensive network the galaxy had ever seen. Activate the next phase, Okonkwo commanded. Let them think retreat is possible, and then show them the truth, deep in the asteroid belt. New systems came online as the word spread through quantum-encrypted channels. These were not kinetic weapons or sensor jammers. These were something far more insidious. The hegemony ships ran on computers that communicated through standardized protocols, and human hackers had been studying those protocols since the first alien trader made the mistake of connecting to Earth's networks. Now, as the enemy fleet fled toward Mars, digital warfare specialists began their assault. Navigation computers on hegemony ships received subtle corruptions to their data. The changes were small enough to escape notice at first, but they accumulated over time, a fraction of a degree here. A slight miscalculation there. 347 ships followed their corrupted navigation systems directly into minefields that humanity had positioned years ago in anticipation of this exact scenario. Mines were simple but effective, combining nuclear warheads with directed X-ray lasers that punched through shields designed for very different weapons. Ship after ship entered the killing zones, and ship after ship died, torn apart by weapons they never detected. War Marshal Shethrix watched in horror as her fleet continued to shrink despite her desperate attempts to restore order. Nothing was working the way it should, and every solution her officers tried only seemed to make things worse. How are they doing this? She demanded of her technical staff. How are primitives who barely discovered space travel defeating the greatest military force in the galaxy? None of them had answers, because none of them could comprehend what they were facing. The hegemony had fought wars against species with bigger ships and stronger weapons, but they had never fought an enemy like humanity. The humans did not try to match hegemony power directly. Instead, they studied their enemy's weaknesses and built systems designed specifically to exploit those weaknesses. This was doctrine, not brute force, and it was something the arrogant hegemony had never encountered on Mars. Hidden bases that had been disguised as research stations revealed their true purpose as the retreating fleet approached. Nuclear-pumped X-ray lasers emerged from beneath the red soil and began tracking targets, and railguns capable of accelerating projectiles to devastating velocities powered up. For the first time, Admiral Vornith was among the first to die when a laser designed to destroy capital ships struck his flagship with enough energy to vaporize the forward third of the vessel instantly. The remaining sections continued traveling through space for several seconds before secondary explosions consumed them entirely. Zethrix screamed in fury as she watched her fleet die around her. But there was nothing she could do. The humans had prepared for this battle for longer than most of her soldiers had been alive. And every defensive line, every weapon system, every tactical decision had been optimized to destroy exactly the kind of force the hegemony had sent in the command center on Earth. Okonkwo received reports of the Mars engagement with quiet satisfaction. The enemy fleet had been reduced by more than half, and they had not yet committed their primary offensive forces. How many troop carriers remain operational? She asked General Yuki Tanaka of the Japanese Self-Defense Force consulted her data before responding. Approximately 40% of their landing forces are still viable, she reported. They are holding position beyond our Mars installations. Apparently uncertain how to proceed, Okonkwo studied the tactical display with calculating eyes. The enemy ground forces represented millions of soldiers who had been trained to conquer worlds, and even with their fleet damaged, they could still cause devastating harm if they reached Earth's surface. They will try to land, she predicted. Their war marshal will see no other option. She has lost too many ships to retreat without something to show for her losses. And her species values conquest above all else, as if hearing her words across the void. War Marshal Shethrix made her decision at that exact moment. She would launch her ground forces in a desperate attempt to secure at least a partial victory, hoping that surface warfare would favor her soldiers' superior numbers and training. All troop carriers, begin descent toward Earth, she commanded. If space is death, we will take the fight to their planet. Our soldiers will crush their armies and claim their world even if every ship is lost. The order spread through what remained of the fleet, and thousands of drop pods began launching toward the distant blue world that had cost them so much already. The pods streaked through space like metal rain, carrying soldiers who believed they were about to achieve the victory that had eluded their fleet. They were wrong. Earth was waiting for them. And Earth had been preparing defenses that made the space battle look like a gentle warning. Every nation, every military, every resource on the planet had been integrated into a single defensive network designed for exactly this. Moment Director Okonkwo watched the incoming contacts on her display and spoke the words that would unleash humanity's true power. Activate the global defense grid, she ordered. Show them what happens when predators invade a world that has learned to bite back across 6 continents. Hidden weapon systems powered up as the enemy approached. Radio towers that had been broadcasting entertainment for decades revealed railgun barrels concealed within their structures. Power plants channeled their output to directed energy weapons buried beneath peaceful cities. Agricultural facilities opened to release swarms of autonomous interceptors programmed to hunt specific biological signatures. The hegemony had expected primitive resistance from divided nations using outdated technology. They were about to discover that they had invaded a planet that had unified in secret and armed itself with every innovation human genius could produce. The drop pods entered Earth's atmosphere at 0-3-50-6 hours, carrying soldiers who dreamed of easy conquest. They would find only fire and death. The sky above Earth burned with streaks of fire as 20,000 hegemony drop pods screamed through the atmosphere, each one carrying soldiers who had conquered worlds and destroyed civilizations. Inside those pods, warriors of a dozen species, prepared for battle with weapons that had proven effective against every enemy the galaxy had ever produced. They expected to find frightened civilians and hauling primitive soldiers with crude weapons. They found something else entirely. First wave of pods approached the eastern hemisphere at angles calculated to distribute their forces across multiple continents. Targeting computers guided them toward major cities and military installations that hegemony intelligence had identified as priority objectives. None of them reached their targets. Railgun emplacements hidden beneath what appeared to be ordinary infrastructure opened fire. The moment the pods entered range. These weapons accelerated small projectiles to speeds that turned simple metal slugs into devastating kinetic strikes. And each shot was guided by tracking systems that had been perfected over decades of secret development. Pod after pod exploded in the upper atmosphere as hypervelocity rounds tore through their thin armor. Soldiers who had never known defeat died without ever seeing the enemy. Scattered across the sky like burning confetti, the second wave adjusted their approach, trying to descend at steeper angles to avoid the ground-based weapons. But this only brought them into range of different systems. Directed energy weapons powered by entire power plants fired beams of concentrated destruction that sliced through pods like light through darkness. Autonomous interceptor drones rose from hidden hangars across every continent, each one designed to hunt specific hegemony species using biological signatures captured from dead aliens during previous skirmishes. The drones were small and fast and relentless, swarming around surviving pods and tearing them apart with explosive charges before the soldiers inside could react of the 20,000 pods that entered Earth's atmosphere. Fewer than 3,000 reached the surface intact. Those soldiers who survived the descent emerged from their crashed vessels expecting to establish beachheads and begin the ground conquest. Instead, they found themselves surrounded by defensive positions that had been prepared specifically for their arrival. Sergeant Major James Okafor of the Nigerian Armed Forces watched through his targeting scope as a group of HFY warriors climbed from a smoking pod 2 kilometers from his position. The insectoid creatures were massive and terrifying, with chitin armor that could stop most conventional weapons and claws that could tear through steel. But James was not using conventional weapons. Confirm biological lock, he requested from his squad's automated systems. Confirmed, the computer responded. HFY respiratory vulnerability identified. Switching ammunition to neural disrupting compound 7, James squeezed his trigger, and a chemically tipped round streaked across the distance to strike the lead HFY in the joint between its head and thorax. The creature collapsed immediately as the compound designed specifically to disrupt its nervous system took effect, and its companions scattered in confusion as more shots found their marks across the planet. Similar scenes played out as human soldiers engaged hegemony forces with weapons tailored to exploit each species' unique weaknesses. The Dralith were vulnerable to specific sound frequencies that disrupted their balance organs. The crystalline Urathi ground troops shattered when struck by resonance weapons tuned to their molecular structure. The gas-breathing Vethkari died instantly when their environmental suits were breached by microdrones. Too small to detect the hegemony, had assumed that their biological diversity would be an advantage, forcing humans to develop separate tactics for each species. Instead, humanity had done exactly that, and every soldier on the planet knew exactly how to kill every type of alien they might encounter. War Marshal Shethrix received the casualty reports from orbit with growing horror as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. Her invasion force was being slaughtered not by overwhelming numbers or superior firepower, but by precise targeted violence that seemed to know every weakness her soldiers possessed. How is this possible? She demanded of her surviving officers. How do they know our vulnerabilities so exactly? The answer was simple, though she would never learn it. For decades, humanity had been collecting intelligence from every alien source they could access: captured technology, intercepted communications, autopsies of deceased aliens from various incidents, and they had used that information to build a comprehensive database of every species in the hegemony when it came time to design weapons. Human engineers had created systems specifically optimized to exploit those vulnerabilities. Every bullet, every beam, every explosive had been crafted to kill aliens as efficiently as possible. The ground outside Moscow, a battalion of Russian soldiers held defensive positions against a wave of Dralith shock troops. The tall gray aliens advanced with confidence, believing their personal shields would protect them from primitive projectile weapons. They were half right. The shields stopped the bullets easily enough, but the shields did nothing against the sonic emitters that the Russians activated when the Dralith came within range. The carefully calculated frequencies struck the aliens' balance organs like hammers, and an entire company of elite soldiers collapsed to the ground. Unable to stand or aim their weapons, Russian troops moved in with bladed weapons designed to penetrate Dralith skin. And within minutes, there were no survivors from the alien assault in the jungles of Brazil. Argentine Special Forces ambushed a HFY hunting pack using thermal camouflage that made them invisible to the insects' heat-sensing vision. The aliens never saw the attacks coming, and their superior strength meant nothing when neural-disrupting grenades reduced them to twitching paralysis in the mountains of Tibet. Chinese forces defended ancient monasteries against Urathi warriors, using resonance cannons that turned the crystalline beings into clouds of sparkling dust. The monks watched in amazement as the soldiers who had trained in their valleys for years demonstrated weapons that seemed like magic to those who did not understand the science behind them. By 0430 hours, the hegemony ground invasion had effectively ceased to exist as a fighting force. 98% of the troops who had reached Earth's surface were dead or incapacitated, and the survivors were being hunted by human units that knew exactly where they were hiding. Deathrix sat alone on the bridge of her flagship, surrounded by displays showing nothing but death and defeat. Her mighty armada had been reduced to 340 ships, and every soldier she had brought to conquer this world was gone. For the first time in her centuries-long life, the war marshal of the HFY swarm felt true fear. The humans had not just defended their world. They had destroyed the most powerful military force the hegemony had ever assembled with what appeared to be casual ease. And the worst part was that she still had not seen their primary offensive capabilities. Everything that had happened so far, the sensor blackout, the kinetic bombardment, the minefields, the ground defenses, all of it had been purely defensive measures designed to stop her invasion. What would happen if the humans decided to attack? She did not want to find out, but as a communication request appeared on her display bearing the identification codes of Earth's unified government, she realized that she was about to learn the answer whether she wanted to or not. The humans had won the defensive battle. Now they were going to tell her what came next. Seth Rix accepted the transmission with trembling claws, and Director Amara Okonkwo's face appeared on her screen with an expression that contained no mercy at all. War Marshal, the human said, we need to talk about the future. War Marshal Shethrix stared at the human face on her display, screen with compound eyes that had witnessed the conquest of 100 worlds. And for the first time in her ancient life, she saw herself as prey rather than predator. Director Okonkwo looked back at her with the calm patience of someone who held absolute power and knew it behind the human director. Shethrix could see the command center where humanity had coordinated the destruction of her fleet. Officers moved between stations with quiet efficiency, and displays showed tactical data that proved just how thoroughly the hegemony forces had been defeated. Marshal Shethrix, Okonkwo began in a voice that carried across the void like ice. Your council gave us 6 hours to fall. We have given you less than 3 to understand your mistake here. Your fleet is surrounded by weapons platforms you cannot detect. Your ground forces are eliminated, and we have not yet deployed our primary offensive capabilities. Shethrix felt her mandibles tremble with something between rage and terror, and she forced herself to respond with what dignity she could muster. You speak of offensive capabilities, she challenged, but I have seen only defensive measures. Perhaps you have nothing else, and this is a bluff to prevent further conflict. Okonkwo smiled, and the expression held no warmth or mercy whatsoever. Watch your sensors. Marshal, across the solar system, signatures began appearing in the dark spaces between planets. Hundreds of them emerged from concealment, revealing themselves for the first time since the invasion began. These were not defensive platforms or weapons satellites, but actual warships, human warships. Hegemony had believed that humanity possessed only a handful of primitive vessels clustered near their moon. But those ships had been decoys, distractions meant to reinforce the enemy's assumptions about human weakness. The real fleet had been hidden in deep space, built in secret facilities on moons and asteroids that alien observation had never detected. Each human ship incorporated technologies, reverse engineered from captured hegemony equipment, combined with innovations that alien scientists had never imagined. They were smaller than hegemony vessels on average, but they bristled with weapons that had been designed specifically to destroy the Mizithrix, watched in numb disbelief as more than 400 human warships moved into attack formation around her surviving fleet. Her tactical officers reported that they were completely surrounded, with no avenue of escape and no hope of victory in combat. You expected to find a primitive species that had barely discovered space travel. Okonkwo continued. You measured us by the standards of your previous conquests, and you assumed we would fold like every other civilization you have encountered. That was your first mistake. She leaned forward, and her eyes burned with an intensity that made even the fearless HFY War Marshal flinch. Your second mistake was believing that our silence meant weakness. We wanted to be left alone, not because we feared you, but because we needed time to prepare, not for defense, but for exactly this moment when we could demonstrate beyond all doubt that humanity is not prey. The human fleet continued to tighten its formation around the surviving hegemony vessels, and targeting locks appeared on sensor displays throughout Shethrix's flagship. One command from Director Okonkwo would unleash devastation. It would eliminate every hegemony ship in seconds. What do you want? Shethrix finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Okonkwo's expression softened slightly, though her eyes remained cold. I want you to return to your council and deliver a message. She replied, tell them that Earth is not a tributary, not a conquest, not a resource to be exploited. We are a sovereign species with the right to determine our own future, and we will defend that right against any force that threatens it. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. Tell them that the next fleet that enters our system will not receive a warning. They will receive annihilation, complete and absolute. With no survivors to report what happened, we have demonstrated restraint today by allowing your ships to survive. But that restraint will not be repeated. Shethrix processed these words with the strategic mind of a warrior who had commanded armies for centuries, and she understood that the human was offering her a gift: survival, in exchange for delivering a message that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of this small blue world. And if the Council refuses to accept your terms? She asked. If they send a larger fleet, or unite the full might of the hegemony against you? Okonkwo's smile returned, and this time it carried something that looked almost like anticipation. Then we will be waiting, she answered. We have spent decades preparing for your single armada. Imagine what we could build given years to prepare for the entire hegemony. Your council may rule 1,000 worlds, but they have never faced a species that unites in the face of extinction and fights with the fury of those who have everything to lose. She gestured toward the displays surrounding her, showing images of Earth where the sun was now rising over peaceful cities that had never been touched by alien invasion. We did not seek this war, Marshal. Your council brought it to us, and we ended it before dawn. Remember that when you make your report, and make certain your leaders understand that humanity will never surrender, never submit, and never stop fighting until we are free or dead. the transmission ended, leaving Shethrix alone with the weight of everything that had happened. Behind her, the first light of Earth's sun crept across the planet's surface, illuminating a world that had just won its freedom from the greatest military power in the galaxy at 0512 hours Earth Standard Time. The remnants of the Hegemony Armada activated their fold space drives and fled the Sol system in complete disarray. They left behind the debris of 1,000 ships, and they, bodies of 12 million soldiers, who had expected easy conquest and found only death. The war that the Council had anticipated would last hours had indeed ended before dawn. They had simply been catastrophically wrong about the outcome 3 weeks later. High Arbiter Vex Tholen stood before the Galactic Hegemony Council as War Marshal Shethrix delivered a report. The chamber was silent as 12 species listened to the account of their greatest military defeat in recorded history. The after-action analysis was devastating in its conclusions. Humanity had lost no ships and suffered fewer than 800 ground casualties while destroying the combined might of the Hegemony's expeditionary force. They had achieved this victory through preparation, adaptation, and a doctrine of warfare that integrated defense, offense, and information dominance in ways the Council had never encountered worse. Human diplomatic vessels were now traveling the outer reaches, speaking to tributary worlds about concepts the Hegemony had long suppressed: freedom, independence, resistance, and many of those worlds were beginning to listen. "What do we do?" asked the ancient Orathi delegate, its crystalline form pulsing with uncertain light. Vex Tholen studied the holographic image of Earth that dominated the center of the chamber, and he remembered the face of Director Okonkwo as she had delivered humanity's ultimatum to the War Marshal. That woman had not been bluffing, and her species had proven that they possessed both the capability and the will to destroy anything the Hegemony sent against them. "We do nothing," he finally answered. "We watch them, we study them, and we pray that they remain content with their little corner of the stars. Any further aggression would only accelerate their expansion and unite other tributary species against us." Several delegates protested this decision, arguing that the Hegemony could not appear weak before its subjects. But Vex Tholen silenced them with a gesture. "We are not appearing weak," he corrected. "We are being wise. The humans have demonstrated that they are not prey to be hunted, and any attempt to treat them as such will only result in more defeats and more dead. Some battles cannot be won, and the wise commander knows when to withdraw." The Council eventually voted to accept this recommendation, though several species did so with obvious reluctance. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Hegemony had encountered a limit to its power on Earth. Director Okonkwo received news of the Council's decision with quiet satisfaction. Humanity had won its freedom, but she knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers, and there were other powers beyond the Hegemony who might someday test humanity's resolve. But that was a problem for another day. Now, she stood at the window of her office and watched the sun rise over a world that had proven it could defend itself. Somewhere out there in the dark between stars, the Hegemony was licking its wounds and learning to fear a species it had once dismissed as primitive. Humanity had announced itself to the galaxy, not as prey or subjects, but as equals, as a force to be respected and reckoned with. Some prey bites back, and some prey was never really prey at all. The war had ended before dawn, and humanity had emerged victorious. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced the Hegemony, united, prepared, and absolutely unwilling to surrender. This was only the beginning of humanity's story among the stars, and the galaxy would never forget how that story began.